When designers present their work to the stakeholders, the team, most of them open their Figma file and take everyone through hundreds of screens that they have created. And somewhere in there, most people doze off. They don't pay attention anymore. While others just create a small presentations with just a few screens and still get something fruitful out of it or get the approval from the stakeholders. What's the difference? The difference generally comes in the way they have presented their designs. While someone focused on how much hard work they have put in creating all these 100 screens, the other person focused on the journey, the story that they are going to tell with all these screens. Hi, my name is Rohan Mishra. I'm the founder of Design Sundays, and today in this video I'm going to bring you back one of my favorite sessions on storytelling in design. This is a session presented by Charu Choudha, who is a lead designer at Microsoft and has experience building great products at Google, Zomato, as well as Adobe. In this video, she is going to tell you about the process she uses to tell great stories and how can you do it as well. I'm sure you're going to learn a ton from this video. If you do, make sure to subscribe and give us a thumbs up on the video. Without any further ado, let's go to the session.
So Rohan mentioned, today I want to talk about a skill which is highly underrated and something we all possess, but we don't talk about it that often. That is called storytelling. And I want to look at it from a product lens, and I want to emphasize on how we can use stories to build great products for ourselves. Before I get into that, let me introduce myself to you. Although Rohan already did, but let me just take a few minutes. So I'm currently product designer working at Microsoft. Here I work on Microsoft Office app, and I have been working on it since the day we started building it. Other than that, I've been fortunate to work on some more projects and some more products, and these are a few products and screens which I worked on or my work has touched in some ways. Before this, I was at Zomato, and I was very fortunate to get to work on pretty cool projects, and I worked on the first version of Zomato Gold, a lot of projects around the consumer apps of Zomato and Zomato Order, and I had immense amount of learning while I was there. While I was at Zomato, the kind of work culture was quite different from what I've been doing today. The way design works at a startup is pretty different. The way it works is very one directional. All the team is co-located and the decision making is much quicker. We have a lot of power to push the concepts we have to the product and get early feedback from users. And there are comparatively limited stakeholders. So when I decided to move to a large organization like Microsoft, I was told that it will be very different. But I thought to myself, how different could it be? What could be new? So I still thought of making that move. But when I joined Microsoft, I realized that there are much more complex parts in the puzzle here. The projects are highly interdependent. I work with a lot of teams apart from engineering, PM and research. I work on a lot of various teams, which sometimes are your partner design teams, sometimes it's your centralized design system teams. And as I said, projects are highly interdependent. So you have to go through a lot of approvals to kind of push your ideas directly to customers. And then getting feedback is a bit slower as compared to a startup. But when I moved there, and I thought that that's okay, I'll somehow figure it out. And I still went on, and I worked on things the way I was doing before. And one of the days I was asked that, Charu, you've been here for a few months, why don't you present your work to leadership, which is like a set of stakeholders which are kind of your final approvers on the things you've been doing. So I thought that this is my golden moment. Let me prepare the best presentation. I mapped out all the user scenarios and all edge cases I could cover, and I put together tons of details in the presentation. I left no stones unturned. And on the day of the presentation, I opened my sketch file, and this is what my presentation looked like. I had just tons of artboard put together, and I was explaining, and I kept on blabbering about all the user flows, all the kind of tiny details. And as you can see, it became too much for the audience. And I didn't realize. After the presentation, I understood that it didn't go so well. I was not able to communicate my concept well enough. And I realized that the audience was still hung up on the problem part. They were not even sure if this is the problem which is good enough to be solved. So I realized that there are a few loopholes, but later on, one of my colleagues, he came to me and he told me that, like, Charu, I have some friendly criticism or advice for you. And he said that I cannot believe you showed that presentation. And it was pretty harsh for me to listen to that. But today I am pretty thankful to that guy because that made me think and look back and see what is the problem. Why was I not able to communicate what I was trying to communicate? And I kept on thinking more about it. So after a few days, I came across this quote. This is from a gentleman who's also written the book called Hard Things About Hard Things, and he's a tech investor. What he's saying is pretty interesting, which is a lot of people, a lot of companies can have great products, but what will make you stand apart from them is the story which you have. And a lot of times we are asked questions, there are these questions thrown to us that why are you building this? Why are you solving this problem? Why do you think it is worth it? Why should we invest our time in it? And most of the times, the answer to these questions are hidden in your product stories. And from this moment onwards, I started identifying these great stories around me every day. And I kind of keep a note of these stories and I try to get inspired from them and somehow use it for my own work. So let me illustrate this with an example to you. If you look at this still, what do you think? Like this lady, what is the app she's using on her phone? She's looking at WhatsApp, and this is a still from a WhatsApp advertisement which I came across a few days back, and I found it to be a great example of a story, of a product story, especially because the way they have shown the features they have shown are pretty basic. They are just video calling and chat, but the way they have shown it in being getting infused with our day-to-day lives of Indian middle class families, you can easily connect to it and you don't even realize it's an advertisement about an app. So I found that to be pretty awesome. But let me tell you why I am calling it a great story. So I have this got to know about this framework from Donna Leacher about great stories. So she has a pretty nice framework of identifying and designing great product stories, and this story somehow aligns with all the phases. So let me tell you what happens in this ad. So this lady here, in the initial moments of this ad, she from the background and from the setting, you could guess that it's an Indian middle class family. So this is the point where you have this hero's introduction in the story. She looks at the mirror and she's thinking to herself, "Oh, it's just a pretty boring day, and things are getting pretty boring and mundane." So she thinks of getting a bit more adventurous, and she does something to her hair and she makes it look shorter. And that's the point where the hero takes the call to adventure, where she thinks of sending that picture to her sister. She opens WhatsApp and she sends a picture to her sister through it. Now there is a moment here where the mentor enters the story. The lady is like really confused. She's thinking that maybe I've not done right, maybe it's too much, I shouldn't cut my hair. But the mentor enters the story and she says that I'll guide you and I'll help you cut your hair. And she said, like, just stay on the video call with me. And then the lady somehow gathers all this courage and she takes the scissor and she cuts the first strand of her hair. And that's probably the climax of this story, where it's the highest point of action. And eventually she continues cutting her hair, and there's a moment of rebirth in the story where she feels so empowered and confident after cutting her hair shorter. And then there is this movement continues, and gradually there is a smooth closure where there is this tagline which comes up that the courage you need is between you. And then the story is kind of taken to a smooth closure. So I found this to be a great example of a product story.
Hey, let's pause for a second. I hope you're learning great stuff here. I'm just here to ask you, if you are, make sure to subscribe so that we can keep bringing back fresh content for you guys every single week. Also, we have a special recommendation for you at the end, which will make this process even easier for you. So do check that out. Let's go back.
So you might say that it's a marketing kind of story, but I think that there is a lot to learn from these kind of stories for product designers like us. Although when you talk about stories in a product, I think they are a good balance between your left brain and your right brain. You have to be informative and logical, and at the same time, you have to keep in mind the emotions and the empathy towards your users. You have to find balance between both, and that's how you can craft a good story for your product. Now, one of the ways how we use stories, how I use stories, and in Microsoft we use stories is we've created this strong story-driven design process. So, what we do here is we do not start our work or creating any product just with a PRD or with a list of features. We start by creating a vision story, and what a vision story means is like we go all out. We don't think about engineering limitations or deadlines. We think about what is our ideal user and what is the ideal scenario and the problem and the kind of solution which is highly ideal. And this helps in two ways. Firstly, this helps in building a mind share among our teams, because if everybody is on board with that long-term goal, it's easier to make the MVP. And secondly, it helps in carving the MVP from that long-term goal. So this has helped us create a lot of great experiences and create a lot of products today. And recently I came across this story from Airbnb. I was listening to one of the podcasts where I heard where Brian Chesky, who's the CEO of Airbnb, he was talking about how they use storytelling for creating their experiences. And he talks about this experience of a perfect trip, where what they did was they were trying to figure out what a perfect trip would look like and what Airbnb can do there. So they hired a team of Pixar storyboard artists and writers, and they asked them to write the script of a perfect trip. Then they reached out to a traveler and they said that like we'll design the perfect trip for you and we'll just follow you in your trip. And they agreed. And after the customer comes back, they got a mind-blowing experience. Then they took that story, they broke it down to smaller storyboards, and eventually that is known as Airbnb trip. So something like this, such a great experience actually started from a written story, which is so strong. And this is what I mean by creating a story-driven process. So the next thing which you can inculcate stories in your product is by thinking of your user flows as small stories, micro stories. So often the times it happens that we think of designing user flows end to end, and if this happens then this will happen, if this happens then this will happen. But there are a few products which look at it from a different perspective. They think of designing it as micro stories, and if it's more than just a simple workflow, it helps them grabbing attention of the users, as well as keeping them engaged with the product. So we also try to do that for our own apps in Microsoft. But one of the great examples I came across yesterday was when I decided to make a transaction on Google Pay, and I found it to be a pretty good example of storytelling in product. Because what happened was I just wanted to transfer some money and I just wanted to get done with it quickly. So I opened my phone and I saw the screen. I wanted to transfer some money to my brother. His name showed up here. I tapped on it. I decided to tap on pay, and this is the time when I took that call to action. Then I inserted like how much amount I want to transfer. Surprisingly, it asked me, what do you want to transfer it for? And I said laddus. And there was a moment of reward there. Like while I wanted to get done with it quickly, I saw that they've introduced this kind of themes, which I found to be interesting, and I could not help and play around with it and just tap on it and see all the themes. And this was a moment of reward or like a surprise in this whole workflow. But I still moved on and I made the payment. And what happened once after my payment was done was there was a moment of closure in the story where they kind of like closed it smoothly with a subtle message. So since yesterday was Independence Day, so they had these 3 kids who were talking about, who were like just waving, and it felt so amazing to me, and I felt so connected with this whole experience. Like after I closed the app, it stayed with me for a while. And I think that is the power of creating more than just user flows or workflows. Rather think about it as you're creating a story in your interaction with the users. I think this is something which could benefit a lot of products, especially the products which you use on a regular day-to-day basis. And lastly, I want to talk about how do you build narratives for your stakeholders. And there is no one way which works for all, because whatever you're talking about, whatever you're presenting, it's going to be way different. But as I showed in the beginning of the presentation, important to do the work, but it's equally important to be able to create a narrative and to sell it. And what I personally do, I can share that with you. So often at times these end-to-end stories of, as I showed, the entire journey of a hero, that might not work for you. And what will work is maybe you have to just intelligently pick a few moments in your story and highlight those, and instead of covering everything and diluting the message. So I would say focus on the moments that matters the most. And the way you can do and you can decide what are your moments that matter is by looking at it in 4 ways. One is think about the audience. So a lot of time the audiences are very different. Like sometimes you're showing it to the product managers, sometimes you're showing it to pretty senior leadership in your company, and the attention span they will have will be way different, and the time they want to give to you will be way different. So sometimes the same story won't work. In fact, most of the times the same narrative doesn't work, and you need to build different narratives which is catered to these different section of audiences. Secondly, think about the context, like where are you sharing this? Are they looking at it for the first time? And you can then decide that do you want to show some data, do you want to show market research, or do you want to show like a before and after of your experience. But that will help you in picking what is the right thing to show. Also think about if you're sending it online or if it's offline. Then think about the takeaway, which is like what is that one thing you want them to go back with. It could be simply something like a message like you're making progress, or it could be even a message about like A versus concept B, and concept B is better and you can show why. So you could do things like that. And lastly, I'll say keep refining your story. When you're building a narrative about your work, it doesn't end just in one go. You need to keep refining it. As you show it to people, you might get some feedback. Continue to refine it, and it will help you to get to a place where you feel very confident about what you've developed. And I think that is the moment when you should start to socialize it a lot. Why this is important is because we have such less attention span, especially when we are looking at others' work, we don't tend to like pay so much attention. So especially in an organization which is bigger, you need to socialize your story a lot. You need to kind of continuously put it out there so that the message you want to send out sticks with people. And if possible, you should also put out your product story for the end users and the customers to look at, so even they can be introduced to your message. And I want to summarize by saying this, that these are the 3 ways I think I have just touched on in which you can use great stories. One is you can create a story-driven design process which will help you be more humanized. Secondly, create a kind of environment where you can build narratives around your stories. And thirdly, don't create user flows, but create these kind of experiences where you're telling more than just you're telling a story to your users, and these are more engaging experiences. And I want to end by saying that great stories like a great design. As we all know, like our designs are invisible and they are simple. Similarly, stories are also invisible and they are simple, but they have a message which you can go back with, which sticks with you. And if you are a great storyteller, then you are a great designer. So work on that skill. That is my recommendation. These are some of the references which I've used while I was talking and while I was going through this presentation. That's all I had. So over to Rohan.
I hope you learned something from the video. If you did, make sure to subscribe so that we can keep bringing back great content for you guys. Also, do check out this video on how to create great stories with motion design by Atul Khola from Cred's design team. I'll see you in that video. Till then, happy designing.